always wanted a life that was filled with love. I was looking for acceptance and belonging, just hoping to be a part of something and make friends. I never wanted to be alone, but the truth is, I always felt that way. The community I was searching for never really let me in. I got fake hellos and polite smiles that made me feel like I didn't belong and that I shouldn't be there. Then, in one incredibly painful season, the fragile pretense of connection I was clinging to vanished. The quiet longing for community was replaced by a deafening silence. This is a story of how losing faith in the people and the institution I thought I needed forced me to find the only one who would never leave. It was, without a doubt, the most painful and isolating experience of my life. But I can stand here today and tell you with everything I am that it was all worth it, because in losing everything, I finally found everything. For most of my life, church was never a constant thing. My brother and I would be forced to go, mainly when my mom needed a break. We were told about God and Jesus and that we needed to believe and trust and have faith in them and pray, but we were never truly taught about faith and what it actually meant to have a real, true relationship with God and Jesus. So when I was 22 and started trying to go to church regularly with my mom and stepdad, it was very strange. I mostly just wanted to find friends. I wanted to feel like I belonged. I didn't know how to define or understand my relationship with God. Instead, I found a church that was cliquey and felt more alone there than I did anywhere else. I started to dislike going, but I kept showing up, hoping things would change. They didn't. Eventually, life took me in a different direction, and I stopped going to church for a long time. Though I never stopped believing in God and Jesus, I moved away, and when I came back, I would take my kids to the church holiday festivities, wanting them to have a good relationship with God. My belief was a private strength, separate from the community. My spiritual life was quiet. When I attended church events, I saw how it was for others, filled with the voices of friends, mentors, and family, all offering thoughts and prayers. I saw their shared strength and group faith. If they had a doubt, they'd call a friend. If they felt weak, they leaned on their small group. It looked comfortable and predictable. And here's the big mistake I made. I mistook that institution for true faith. I mistook the presence of people for the presence of God. I thought my kids needed that building to find God, and I kept trying to make it work for us. It wasn't a bad life, not at all. It was a good life, but it was a propped up idea of what faith should look like. My faith was like a tree planted in shallow, rocky soil. It had never been tested by a real storm because it had always kept sheltered and private. I didn't know it then, but a hurricane was coming. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow fade, and then a sudden, sharp drop. It started with a family tragedy. My mom, a member of her church for years and a Sunday school teacher, needed her pastor. He allowed us to use a room for a celebration of life ceremony. But at the service itself, he treated my grieving mother like a stranger. He just hovered in the background. I don't remember him offering a single condolence or saying a kind word about the person we had lost. The one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary became the source of our deepest pain. I was disgusted. I couldn't bring myself to go back to church, and I couldn't take my kids there either. I felt so betrayed by the institution that I stopped calling myself a Christian, even though I held on to my personal belief in God and Jesus. That betrayal shattered everything. The quiet I had been used to turned into a different kind of silence. It wasn't just an absence of noise. It became a presence in my house. It was a heavy blanket of rejection that suffocated me. The silence from the community that was supposed to care was deafening. The silent phone felt like an accusation from the very people who claimed to be my church family. I felt invisible. The sting of it was a physical ache in my chest. And that's when the really hard questions started, the kind you're scared to even whisper. I'd sit in my quiet house and whisper, God, where are you? Did you leave too? I felt that raw cry from David in the Psalms. How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? I started to wonder, is it me? Am I being punished? What did I do so wrong that the people who are supposed to represent you have turned their back on me? It felt like God himself had hidden his face from me. The pain of being abandoned by my church was one thing, but the absolute terror of being abandoned by God, that was a whole new level of despair. My already fragile trust had completely collapsed, and I was just left there, crushed in the rubble. One day, a decade later, the rose-colored glasses I'd been wearing, thinking everything was fine, had finally come off. I was overwhelmed with the sudden realization that I really needed God and Jesus. I knew I needed to make my relationship with God and Jesus closer and stronger. There was no lightning bolt, no audible voice. There was just a shift, a tiny, almost unnoticeable change in the feeling of the silence. The silence that had been so heavy and accusing started to feel different. It was still quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet anymore. It was almost a peaceful quiet. It was a kind of stillness that isn't empty, but full. And in that stillness, it truly felt like I was exploring God's Word for the first time. A promise I found felt like it was written just for me. It's found in the book of Hebrews. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. I hadn't heard this verse before. It was a brand new discovery. Sitting there, stripped of the community and the religious structure I had leaned on. It wasn't just a nice saying on the page. It was a personal promise, a rock-solid, unbreakable covenant. All the human promises had been broken. All the conditional friendships had failed. But this one promise remained. That was the "but God" moment. I had lost my faith in Christians, but God was still there. I felt abandoned by my church, but God would not forsake me. The love I had known from people was conditional and fragile. But God's love was a covenant. He wasn't just with me when I was easy to love. He was with me in the mess, in the pain, in the ugly cry on the living room floor. He didn't walk away. And suddenly Jesus' words from Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 made sense in a way they never had before. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I was so weary. I was carrying this massive burden of rejection and loneliness. And for the very first time, I came to him with nothing else. No church community, no pastor to follow, no small group to lean on, just me. And I found rest. Not a fix to my problems, but a deep rest for my soul. Life after that day didn't magically snap back to how it was. The trust that was broken with the church wasn't instantly restored. In fact, it took years before I could even imagine going back to any church. But the difference was the broken trust didn't break me anymore. The goal wasn't to get my old life back. The goal was to build a new one on a completely different foundation. The silence I once hated became my sanctuary. In the quiet mornings, with a cup of coffee and talking to God, I learned to hear God's voice for myself. Unfiltered by a pastor's agenda or anyone else's opinion, my prayers were no longer a performance or a group project. They were raw, honest conversations with the God of all comfort. I learned he could handle my anger, my sadness, and my doubt. I discovered he wasn't scared of my messy reality. My faith was no longer a tree trying to grow in the rocky soil of a flawed institution. It was finally growing its own roots, digging deep into the soil of his faithfulness. For the first time in my life, my identity wasn't found in being part of a group. It was simply in being a child of God. And that was more than enough. God started to guide me back to him in Jesus. I learned that my worth wasn't decided by a church directory or an invitation list, but by the unchanging, unconditional love of the Creator of the universe. If you like to wear daily reminders of God's promises, I've linked one of my favorite Christian apparel brands, Love and Faith, below. You can also save 10% with my discount code. And I started to understand that passage in 2 Corinthians on a whole new level. The one that says, God comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. This painful season wasn't just for me. God was allowing me to be broken so I could learn what his comfort actually felt like, and then be able to share that real comfort with other people who are hurting. He isn't wasting my pain. He is turning my deepest wound into my greatest ministry. Losing trust in the one place that should have been the safest was the most painful pruning of my life. It truly felt like I was being cut down to nothing. But it was right there, in that nothingness, that I discovered the one who is everything. The stripping away of all the props and all the noise was the only way I could finally learn to stand on my own, with him. And after years, I'm starting to learn how to heal. He guided me back. I found a wonderful church that my family and I started attending earlier this year. I will link the church website below if you'd like to check them out. If you are in that season of silence right now, if you feel betrayed, invisible, and forgotten, please hear me. You are not alone. Even when it feels like you are not forsaken. This painful season might just be God's invitation to you, an invitation to go deeper with him than you ever imagined. An invitation to discover that his presence is more real than any human institution, and his love is more constant than any family tie. Don't give up in the silence. Lean in. He is right there. If this story touched you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. You aren't alone in this feeling. And if you know someone who feels isolated and forgotten, please share this with him. Let's remind each other that even when we feel like we've lost everyone and everything, we find God, and He is more than enough. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.